Hi, Jamie. This is Candace on.
Hi there, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for this important workshop, What Does Back to School Mean for My Child? My name is Jamie Birch. I'm glad to be here with you. I am the Projects and Community Coordinator for the NWDSA and ABI programs of Northwest Disability Support. I will be moderating this webinar. Our organization is the Community Parent Resource Center for Oregon State. We developed this workshop to provide you information, resources, and support for the upcoming school year in Oregon. During this webinar, you will learn to navigate a successful and supported school year for your child, student, understand the rights of students in new online distance learning environments, know where to find information about written safeguards and important details in the Oregon Department of Education's Ready Schools Safe Learners Guidance for every school district in Oregon, and more. This workshop is recorded and will be posted on our website, abicommunity.org. And let me just get our presenter up here for you. Candace, do you want to go ahead and turn your video on? It looks like
Jamie, it tells me I'm unable to start the video because it's been stopped by the host.
Okay.
And then if we can give Sarah Stoltz, if she can share her screen. Sarah, if you're willing to share the PowerPoint, we can go through that. Or I can share it.
Sure. I'll take a second to get it up.
Thank you.
There we go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're about 55 people strong, which is amazing. I want to thank everybody for hosting and setting this up. Northwest Down Syndrome Association is a key partner to the department and the work that we do. We have similar goals on inclusion and on how students should be supported. Oh, and you've got an old picture of me, right?
I do, and if you don't mind, I'd like to give a quick intro.
Please, that sounds great. And
Sure.
Sarah that'll give Sarah time to get things running up on the back end.
Yes, thank you. So we are so pleased to have you today, Dr. Pelt, and like to introduce Dr. Candace Pelt, who will be presenting today. Dr. Pelt is Assistant Superintendent with the Oregon Department of Education, ODE. Candace has presented for us before and shares our empowering values, belief in equity, and the right for every child to belong and have the supports they need to be successful in school. Partnerships and communication are critical for these changing times. We are glad to be working with Dr. Pelt and the Oregon Department of Education. We know that Candace is looking forward to unpacking the Ready Schools Safe Learners guidance and requirements for the 2021 school year for you. Oregon Department of Education staff will be monitoring the live Q&A, so please do ask questions in the Q&A throughout the webinar if you have them. Questions will be answered as time allows, and any unanswered questions will be answered after the workshop, and all questions and answers will be available on our website after this webinar. Dr. Pelt, we appreciate your willingness to help Oregon's parents and professionals understand the Ready Schools Safe Learners guidance created between Oregon's governor, Oregon Health Authority, and the Oregon Department of Education. thank you, Candace, for being here and taking the time to share with us.
Jamie, thank you. I want to make sure I have the ability, I have a few people that I'll need to have information in the chat, and I will introduce here. First is Dr. Sarah Stoltz. Dr. Sarah is our resident expert in all things IEP and IDEA. She's a practitioner, a teacher, and educator, quite passionate believer in inclusion. And so she's going to be helping us both with a presentation, but in the chat. She works for the department under the IDEA Part B school age team. We have with us our director, Michelle Patton. And Michelle is here as a parent advocate, has been a principal and a school leader, and is here supporting all of the work we're doing as well. In addition, we have Mike Franklin. Mike is sitting as our legal specialist. Mike is able to support any questions that you may have as a parent on what are your rights and what you can do and how you can access those rights. And if you have questions and you don't feel like you want to go through a formal process, Mike can be the easiest go-to connection for you. So in the chat, they will be monitoring and taking care of some of those. Looking at permissions for screen sharing. Jamie, can we give Sarah permission to screen share? If not, it can be.
Yes.
Okay.
Sarah, are you able to screen share yet?
Not yet. It says host disabled, participant screen sharing.
All right.
So I'd like to welcome, while they're working on setting that up, all the parents and families. So when you're in here in the chat, please feel free, use the chat feature. So you just click on that bottom button where it says chat, and on the right-hand side, it should pop up a panel for you, and you can be watching a conversation happening as it's going along. And that might be a great way if you have questions, or if you want to ask something specific for me or for any of the team. We're happy to help you through that. And the team will be monitoring the chat as I go through this presentation. And along the way, if something comes up that seems confusing or you need more information, feel free to stop and pause. This slideshow will be available. Jamie has access to it, so she can post it immediately. So you can go back and review this. Some of the slides we're going to walk through a little faster today just because they're high level overview, but then you can go back and watch later and see if you need some more information and really some time to understand it and unpack it. So released yesterday, or I think today is now, August 11th, so 2 days ago, was the 4 updates for the Ready School Safe Learners. So this was first published in June when the world looked a little different in Oregon around COVID, and then there have been ongoing updates. So the newest updates include both new health and safety metrics under Ready School Safe Learners for all students. There is a companion document over 50 pages on ensuring equity and access. And this is where it's really specific to students who experience disability. The comprehensive distance learning guidance is the guidance that schools and districts are required to follow if they are off-site. So there's those 3 are really, really big, important pieces, and they all link together. So often what we have found is if somebody doesn't see it in one, it's linked within another. And so you can ask the COVID-19 email for information, and we're trying rapidly to get answers out. The other part that was released is the planning for scenarios in schools. And so if you are in a school or a district that is opting or is in accounting metrics where they can come back on site, you're able to look at those scenario tables and see what are the requirements and how are people going to be able to access next steps, when do they close a cohort, when is a family notified of that, and what are families' rights under FERPA to ensure privacy still. Okay, so we'll go through. Next slide, please. So all of these guidance documents were written with the guiding principles: ensuring safety and wellness, cultivating connection and relationship, centering and focusing on equity, and then asking teams to innovate, because this is a unique situation and circumstance, and truly every teacher became a new teacher last spring, and they are just now starting into their what would be their second year of trying to access education and teaching in a new environment. All of the Ready School Safe Learner guidance includes key practices for reducing the spread of COVID-19. So no matter what, every student and every staff member should have access and rights to make sure that they are safe physically first, and then that the requirements for public health and safety are the prevailing rule. And so Oregon Health Authority has the ultimate rule when we talk about conditions of this that is established through the governor's executive order. So physical distancing, hand hygiene, cohorting, protective equipment, isolation and quarantine, environmental cleaning, and airflow and ventilation. These are all key practices that we keep reminding, educating leaders how to use and keep moving forward. I can go to the next slide. So it's so often I've been asked this question, when is this going to be done? When can we just move back to school? And as Dr. Fauci has reminded us, we don't control the timeline, right? And that this virus has definitely controlled it. And our job during this is to change the direction of our sails. We need to adjust those because the wind is coming, and it has been. And so our job as education leaders, as the state education agency, and as schools and districts, and then as families, we all need to think about how our sails have to adjust to meet this new condition. We know that there is a current, through the summer months, we saw a significant uptick in the number of cases. And this is really what triggered a statewide metrics on school reopening. So while many schools were planning to open in a hybrid in the fall, the metric release was under the governor's order and in partnership with Oregon Health Authority and the Oregon Department of Education to make sure that all students who come back are not part of a condition where there is high community spread. Next slide, Sarah. So the metrics have been updated and released in here. They're part of the package of information of Ready School Safe Learners. So if you look at section 0, this has all this information. These are some graphic representations of it. So returning to in-person instruction, for a school or a district to be allowed to return fully on-site K-12, that they must meet the state requirement, which is that the state is less than 5% positivity in the testing. So out of all the tests they do, they can have less than 5% positive. And then they must meet specific county metrics. So the county where a school is at can support different pieces of instruction. And then there are required elements for districts to shift to online, depending on the metrics they may enact or may meet. Next slide. One of the new pieces of information that was just released on Tuesday is there is a provision for an exception for a statewide allowance for limited in-person instruction. This allows, no matter what the circumstance in the county or the state, that a school or a district can bring students back on site in a very, very small, limited scope capacity. They must be part of comprehensive distance learning guidance. They must follow all of those components. They have to be ready to fully comply with all the safety and the health standards in Ready School Safe Learners and submit an operational blueprint. And they can't have any confirmed cases of active students or staff in the past 14 days. This is really an important piece. The requirements of it say that a district cannot use this as a disability-only provision, so they can't say that they're going to bring back just students who experience disability or just students with a under race or students who are part of an LGBTQ plus group or for any other protected class. It must be based on educational need. So a student who experiences disability is also a general education student. They are a general education student first, which means they would have access and rights to come back if a family elects to. A family can say, no, we don't feel like it's safe, and the school district cannot tie any specially designed instruction or related services to it. It must be an option and an offering if a school decides to. Schools also do not have to elect this. This is an option they can use. Often what we found in the spring for many of our assessments and for many students and groups, there were opportunities and times where this could have been a potential provision if it was done safely. So we believe that we've given districts and schools a lot of flexibility to use this. It's a very small window of time. It's only 2 hours a day, and the conditions are less than 10 in a cohort, and staff can only be part of 3 cohorts, and students can only be part of 2, including transportation. So it's really making sure that school stays safe if we're bringing students back on site. And again, a family can elect this. If a family decides that this is not, it doesn't feel safe and it doesn't feel like the conditions are appropriate, they can say, no, we continue to elect for services under comprehensive distance learning. And next slide. So again, schools can offer this based off of need for any of these reasons, right? That I mentioned. So that can be to assess to any academic area, to support live peer-to-peer interaction, to build school community and culture, and provide voluntary supplementary supports. It can offer based off of educational, relational, curricular, instructional need. So schools have a wide variety of options they can use to get to this metric, but they are not required to. The next slide. So some safeguards and protections in here. Schools should not offer or suggest limited in-person based solely on disability, race, gender, religion, or sexual orientation. So again, they cannot say that school is closed and will be closed unless you meet this category if it's part of a protected class. Student participation in limited in-person must be voluntary, and it cannot be a required element for any course or grade. So I've gone through a little bit of this. It's in the documentation if you'd like to read more. It's limited by group size, limited by time in the building, and limited by absolute size. So school districts will be grappling with how to navigate that with their transportation, with their hours, and with their limitations. The limited by guidance and legal protections. So we know that, I shared this earlier, it cannot replace the requirements of comprehensive distance learning, and districts under CDL must adhere to this. For students who experience disability, authors of faith cannot require students to come on site. So if you're part of a district that elects to do this, families have the option to say, no, we're not electing to have this service. And students must continue to have full provisions of faith, so the free, appropriate public education, which students have a right to under IDEA, to meet this. For students who require language instruction, so students who are acquiring English skills, schools also cannot require them to come on site for limited in-person instruction. So some of the other exceptions that could be happening, and this really depends, there's a lot of things going on within the metrics and a lot of different situations depending on the county you're in and the part of the state. So for the other exception that we're seeing a lot of discussion around is K-3. If parents are part of a district that is in a county where the case rate is less than 30 per 100,000, they can meet this, and schools must be able to comply with 1 through 3. And the test positivity, again, the number of tests that have been positive, will be in there for the past 3 weeks. They can meet this condition. So then they can start to bring back K-3 on site. Again, all protections for students and families in this. If a family elects not to come on site, they are not required to. There are a number of exceptions, and we can go through those pretty quick. Sarah will just click through all the rest of those exceptions. If you'd like to spend more time reading and unpacking them, different district enrollment size, different county options depending on the size of the county for large, medium, and small counties, what they can do within that. And so, and for our counties that have the lowest density population, there are other choices for them. So we'll get into the guidance for ensuring equity and access is aligning federal and state requirements. This is a 3-part document for school districts, and it's intended to provide a lot of support in every area related to the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is the federal grant that oversees all of Title I, title services, Title III for language services, all of the things that our elementary schools are doing, foster care, students who experience houselessness. It also includes information for all students protected under ADA and Section 504. And then it has a lot of information for school districts on how to provide services for students who experience disability throughout this school year. All of these are also available on the COVID-19 site for ODE if you'd like to read and review them. I'm going to do just some high-level overviews. We can skip this slide. Some of these are really specific to how districts spend their dollars. As students protected under ADA and Section 504, something important to remember is all students who are protected under IDEA, who have an IEP, also have the protection of ADA, right? It's the umbrella protection. So schools must evaluate accommodations and modifications for all instructional settings under a Section 504 plan. Under different instructional models, accommodations and modifications may need to be added, revised, or removed. And so there's a number of things that have to happen within that. Always instructional access needs to be accessible for all learners. The other requirement within this is that teams need to consider both the needs of the student for access as well as any family or caregiver for support access. So if a family member is the one doing a lot of the provision of service during the day and they're providing the direct support, and they can't access visually the information, the team needs to work on understanding that and providing new and updated supports to that accommodation. The required health services for students under Section 504, so students again under an IDEA plan or Section 504 plan are protected under this. The requirement is that districts need to determine whether a student is able to benefit from the provision of any service via telehealth, to align those services to the licensing board, and then to provide therapy or other related service when they're determined. So schools really have to spend some time evaluating whether they're on site, they're in hybrid, or they are in comprehensive distance learning, how they're going to provide those services and what they're going to look like. Some important distinctions to understand. Comprehensive distance learning is the general education plan that most school districts are going to be in if they're in an urban or an area where the county metrics has not allowed them to open on site. This is different significantly than home instruction or homeschooled. And so I want to make sure people understand this concept and what the implications are and what the provisions and rights are under that. So comprehensive distance learning, it's changed for everybody. So it's not a change of placement. It's not a decision that was made specifically for a student. It was the outstanding provision of COVID created this condition. So students enrolled in a public school system, they receive this service outside of the traditional brick and mortar. So students protected under IDEA continue to be protected in all provisions of IDEA. So the school systems have to ensure free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. That continues to be a safeguard that parents can support. Home instruction, students enrolled in a public school system and receive special education and related service. So this would have been, if you think previous to COVID, a student who was bound to the house or home instruction and couldn't leave for usually it's medical reasons we saw, that the team would be required to do all the provisions of IDEA. The school system is ensuring FAPE still and implementing the services. And that is different than what is comprehensive distance learning now, even though most instruction is going to be happening in the home. The provisions of IDEA and what the services may look like could be different for the student based off of the team and the family determination of that. Different than both of those is homeschooling. If parents elect to homeschool, if you choose to remove your student from a district-run program or a public school system into a private or a homeschool, this is not part of the public school system, and FAPE does not apply. So you lose the protections and the safeguards of IDEA if you make that election. So I really want to make sure parents understand the difference in navigating this. I see that Heather's in the chat from FACT. If you have specific questions on this, I know that she'll be able to help answer. If you've had questions about the decision you should make for your particular child. Next slide. So limited in-person instruction, we talked about that was an allowable service that any school can provide now, but again, they can provide it, they're not required to provide it. So if a school or a district starts to go down that path, there's some big rules that they have to follow and navigate. Limited in-person instruction can be offered under comprehensive distance learning. When considering services on site, instruction should be focused on skills that are difficult to teach through distance learning and with students that are unable to access instruction through distance learning. So we know for a number of our students, distance learning in the spring was it was a significant struggle to access the instruction. They would be the primary candidates to focus instruction and see. And nice. The continued requirements for child find, that all students are eligible for provisions of finding eligibility under IDEA. That continues through all the models. The next slide. Some things to know and understand as a parent is that there's a couple different ways that an IEP can be presented to you during this school year. Option A that school districts have is that if they elect, if you're part of a situation where there is a year-long plan, for example, if you as a family have determined that you are going to remain in comprehensive distance learning, you don't have any intention of coming back on site even if a school opens, that you can have a very typical IEP written in a model that's very sequential to what you have normally held, and it would include the present levels, the goals, the services, the least restrictive environment. All of that would remain pretty constant and should be tailored to being on offline or in that comprehensive distance learning environment. Option B is recommended if a school district or program anticipates switching between models. So if a family says, we're electing to come on site when you can get there. We think that's the best thing for our student. And when you're in comprehensive distance learning, we'll be there with you. And then when our child can come back on school, this is the option. Schools can use either option. Districts have the option to elect. Option B, what we're recommending for them is that it would be, they could present two different levels of information for families. And it's really to show, so a family knows and understands deeply what the service looks like in any model. So when the IEP is written and developed, you should leave with a clear understanding of, if we're in distance learning, this is the service. If we're on site, this is the service. And I think those are going to be important pieces to understand, and keep asking questions if you don't have it. Schools are going to be working to understand this guidance as well, because this was just released. So I think this is new, and I would, my caution on this is that you as parents are getting this ahead of a number of school district special ed teachers. And so it was released, doesn't mean they've had time to process all of this yet. So just cautionary, give them time to know and understand this new requirement as it comes up. The next slide. Under comprehensive distance learning, actually, I wonder if I should pause, and Sarah, if you have been monitoring the chat, is there a way for you to elevate any questions that were specific to the guidance that you think didn't get answered or I should answer in here?
Candace, I've actually been.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, Sarah couldn't get on, so I've actually been monitoring the chat.
Perfect.
There was one way up here. I got to find it. Oh, Bruce had specific questions about contact tracing. There's the understanding that schools will need to communicate with the LPHA, but if it's taking 14 days to get a test back, what is that going to look like?
Yeah, so contact tracing isn't done in the schools. That continues to be done with local public health authorities. Schools are required to have logs of information. So what the school is going to do is likely provide that information to the LPHA. Depending on the LPHA's capacity, we're seeing different responses in different counties because understandably they are also inundated with a number of services. So there is that scenario table that I shared at the beginning that outlines the different steps. And so if there's a presumptive or a positive case, or if there's a student displaying symptoms or a staff member with symptoms, there are steps that the district is going to have to take. And so really thinking through that it may not always be a positive result that we see, because exactly as mentioned, right, sometimes it may take longer.
And the other question related to masks and students being unable to wear them due to a disability, and will that mean they will need to be separated from peers?
There is a provision in the Ready School Safe Learners under the section on face coverings that excludes students if they have a disability that prevents them from wearing a face covering. And we put a section in there that really outlines that it may be for a variety of reasons, not just any what people are normally thinking and ascribing to it around breathing problems, but it may be sensory, it might be touch. There's a lot of reasons that students might struggle with it, and it's a new condition. And so for a number of our students, it's going to require teaching, it's going to require instruction and normalizing the behavior of wearing a face covering. And so I would encourage you to read that. There's a lot of protections within that section of RSSL. That's the first one.
Okay. And then questions around if schools return to campus and parents don't feel it's safe, are they legally allowed to change their minds and go to distance?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so parents have the option throughout any part of this. It's written into the Ready School Safe Learner guidance that families can elect and say, based off of a number of factors, we're electing comprehensive distance learning, and that continues to be a right for all students, and it's definitely a right as students are navigating this school year.
And then related to that one that just popped up, if our kids have extra health concerns, do we have to accept a fully asynchronous e-learning model with no peer interaction if that is the district's option for people who aren't comfortable coming back to in-person?
Yeah, so that's a great segue. I'm going to start going into the next slides, which are around the requirements for comprehensive distance learning. And we're going to talk about teacher facilitation. We're going to talk about synchronous and asynchronous and what that means. And then what are the shifts you should be seeing and thinking. So I'm shifting a little bit in this presentation right now. So what I just gave you was the metrics on reopening, on what could look like inside, on-site, and how you can get there. And then right now, this section, I'm going to talk about the requirements of comprehensive distance learning, what that looks like and what you should be experiencing, and how that should feel and look different than it did in the spring under Distance Learning for All. So CDL, as we've called it, which is comprehensive distance learning, it's instruction you should see increased teacher time, a focus on teacher facilitated learning, English language support and special education support provided through real-time opportunities, relationship and connection, continued daily real-time check-in, daily peer interaction, and daily attendance. We also are saying under CDL, there needs to be family engagement and connection, family and student feedback 3 times a year, and infrastructure, device, software, content, and professional learning needs. So those are all going to look and feel a little different as the requirements have shifted for districts and schools. Teacher facilitated learning is the biggest shift. So in Distance Learning for All, this was new to everybody. And like I said, every teacher, I believe, was doing the very best they could. And it was a time that was really hard for people to learn and navigate. Now we've had some time under our belts in this. We can plan, we've made some lessons and design and create. So teacher facilitated learning is a requirement for all students who experience disability under comprehensive distance learning, that the majority of services must be teacher facilitated and can be synchronous or asynchronous. So we'll talk about what those two mean in a second, but I think this is the big important one, that it needs to be focused, facilitated instruction for your child. And that's a requirement under all services for IDEA. Can you go back just one, Sarah? So on this one, students receive feedback on their work and the learning progress. They have choice and voice in what they do. They're engaged in daily grade level or above grade level learning. They're accessing. I think for students who have disability, this is a particular protection that we have talked about, that they have continued access and modification and adaptation to inclusive classrooms and practices and peers. There should be clear and consistent structure and communication. And then we can go to the next slide. So this teaching can be asynchronous or synchronous. So the question that we received earlier was around asynchronous activity. And this is what we saw a lot of in the spring, was a lot of pre-recorded lectures and readings, video demonstrations, practice problems, quizzes, assignments, and analytical groups. What we're saying is it can be both, and it needs to be a balance of both, right? And that synchronous learning would be virtual classrooms, live webinars, interactions in student groupings. And so there's much more requirement for peer interaction in this. Checking in with students, focused activities for real-time connection. And then we've required office hours where families can say, I just need to connect with the teacher and understand what's happening. So again, for all students, the requirement is teacher facilitated, can be mostly teacher facilitated, needs to be synchronous or asynchronous, and a balance of. The exception that always lives in this is if an IEP team determines this is not appropriate for my child, even this doesn't work, we need this condition, a family can make a decision, an IEP team can make a decision and make a plan about that, and through the normal IEP process, and talk about what are the requirements in that. So in our guidance, we do talk for districts and give them step by step, what are the things they need to do if a family decides this isn't the right choice, or a school team says we should talk about this isn't working in this model. And so there's IDEA protections throughout it. Next slide. All of the documents, this is interwoven in every document we have where we're safeguarding student opportunities, where all students should have full learning experiences. There's a credit assurance plan for your secondary students in high school. Student progress and promotion and placement have to be ensured. So students never should, under an IEP, protected under IDEA, should not have any placement decisions made due to COVID. No students should ever be retained due to this, and cohorts should be maintained for education standards and are not based on disability or demographics. And one of the requirements is that schools cannot take students who experience disability and put them together in a cohort, either online or in person. So the cohorting needs to be demographically mixed, just like their classroom. And next slide. Okay, so before we get to that one, go back one, and we'll go into complaint process and kind of your rights, and we'll see if Mike Franklin, I think, has been in the chat, so he can be supporting your questions. So Michelle, any questions on comprehensive distance learning, synchronous, asynchronous, assignments that we can elevate and answer?
Yeah, I have one from Sarah. If a child struggles with Zoom video meetings with a maximum of 30 minutes daily, can we prioritize small group peer interactions and request video instruction or asynchronous learning as an accommodation?
Yep, that sounds like a perfect solution to a struggle with your real time. Every part of this says, meet with the family, meet with the team, consider the conditions. And so I think the solution you proposed is one that I would bring to the team and say, this is my suggestion for how this can work.
And then some questions around compensatory education. Are we getting to that, or is that something
we'll go into that part in a second.
Okay, perfect. All right, I think we're okay to, if the district goes, I think we've answered this. If the district has gone into full in-person, can we request comprehensive distance learning as an accommodation for health needs? So yes.
Yes, any student has the rights to say we are not going to be served on site. We elect comprehensive distance learning, even if a district comes back on site.
Okay, I think we're good.
Okay, next slide, and we'll go into this. And we have Mike Franklin on here. So I'm going to introduce again. Mike Franklin is our legal specialist at the department. Mike is he has the wonderful job of answering and fielding all questions legal related. And so I'm going to talk through the first part of the process, and then I will overview the second one. And as you have questions about your rights through this, I think we can elevate those between Mike and I. We might be able to provide an answer. I also think I saw Jennifer Spencer-Imes on here. Jennifer is a special ed director in Westland Wilsonville, and Jennifer likely has some pretty terrific answers on how this works and what parents can and should be asking for. Jennifer, I think I saw you on there if you're still there. So under the new guidance under RSSL, ODE is charged with enforcing public compliance. And this includes and is different than IDEA. So this is for any student. So what we previously would have said would have been a Division 22 complaint. That would have been for all school, general education, anything related to school. There is a complaint process. The Executive Order 2029, which was the governor's last order, says public schools shall continue to receive allocations from the state school fund as long as they comply with the provisions of this order. And a complaint process will enforce requirements, not recommendations. So as you go through the guidance, there are sections that say required, and then there's sections below it that say recommendations. The requirements are ones that districts and schools must be able to meet, and the recommendations are ones that we highly believe are effective. What schools can expect is that ODE will direct complaints to go to the district first. So if you file a complaint, as a parent, we'll push back and say, have you filed already with a district complaint process? Because districts have all established that process, and it should go through that first. Complaints that come into ODE will be forwarded to the district as a courtesy for technical assistance. Districts then have 2 business days to respond to you and resolve the issue. That you may then appeal to ODE if you disagree with their response, and then ODE will investigate and issue a final order. If the department finds it's out of compliance, it will include corrective action, timeline to complete, and corrective action could include directing a school or 1 or more cohorts into distance learning. This is really enacted around public health and safety. So if a family, a community member, a staff member feels that there is something happening that's outside of the rules of Ready School Safe Learners, they're able to say this violates this requirement. So your first job is to notify the school and district to make sure first they didn't, if it wasn't an oversight, and then the district responds and then walk through these steps. So this is for all things related to public health and safety, but also in comprehensive distance learning, the requirements of it are part of that as well, because it's how general education is going to be providing service. So we can go to the next slide. So under IDEA, you have additional options. And so I want to make sure we see those. The first is mediation facilitated by a mediator provided by ODE. The second is a request for a complaint investigation. There's no hearing or party. It makes specific allegation of an IDEA violation. The department appoints an investigator. Final order is issued within 60 days. And then a request for a due process is a more formal process, and each party presents evidence before an administrative law judge, and this usually takes longer. All 3 of these don't require a parent to have legal representation and can be done independently. It does require a little bit of work and navigating, and so I encourage you to leverage your partners that are here, your partners with FACT as you need them, and to call the department as you have questions. And we can help you walk through some of those processes. Mike, if you're, or Jamie, if you can unmute Mike or allow him access. Mike, anything you would like to add in this?
No, actually, I think it all makes pretty good sense, and it's all straightforward, which makes sense since I wrote it. But I'm going to insert the link again to our dispute resolution page because it's on the next slide, but it's entirely too small for any human being to actually read there. So I'll repost that link.
Thank you, Mike. Mike, one of the things that I noticed in the chat, and I've heard this a little bit, is some districts are refusing mediation at this point. And again, mediation is a step in the process, and it requires both parties to agree. So a district can say, due to the circumstances, we're not electing mediation right now. And so can a parent. If a district says, we'd like to enter into a mediation, a parent can say, no, thank you, we'd like to move further. Mike, do you have any thoughts on that or anything to add?
No, I mean, like you said, mediation's a purely voluntary activity. However, it's not out of the realm of possibility for a district in particular to indicate ahead of time that they won't mediate, but then make a decision if a complaint's actually filed that, you know what, maybe it is worth sitting down and trying to work this out rather than going through all the procedural hoops you have to go through while the complaint's being investigated. So just because they say that on the front end doesn't necessarily mean that's what their decision will ultimately be.
Yeah, and we encourage often a lot of sitting down together and trying to talk through what are the concerns and what are the issues. Often we know that we can resolve them when we come to the table together. Jennifer, the first step, a heartfelt conversation over a cup of tea. I think Jennifer and I are of like minds of this, that the more we spend time working through the complaints of a process, the less we get done for our students. And so I'm in deep agreement on this, that we can be doing a lot, both as parents, as caregivers, as educators, and each time trying to come into that. So yeah, thank you, Jennifer, for
My
the reminder.
Probably a good question for you at this time. If there is an issue that's a denial of FAPE under IDEA and out of compliance with the executive order, would families initiate complaints through both processes or choose one?
That's a great question.
My inclination would be that they would go through the regular special education dispute resolution process.
I think you could do both though as well, because if there is a violation of health and safety under the executive order, that would come under the first process. And then if there's a violation of FAPE, that would come under Mike's process. But what could happen is if you wrote one complaint or you notified the department, both teams could be working together in tandem. So you likely aren't going to be navigating two separate processes.
Right. It's just that, with the special education specific part of the complaint, we've got specific timelines that we have to meet. So our rules would be a bit different.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Michelle, any other questions related to the provision of service and opportunities?
Now, if I can go back one though, if a district chooses to offer limited in-person instruction, is there a maximum limit they can offer per day or per week?
There is both. There are limits on size, on capacity, on time. So if they offer that, it is 2 hours per student per day, and that can't be intermittent. And there's a number, a cohort of 10. So you can't have more than 10 students, and a student cannot be more than 2 groups, and a teacher can't be more than 3. So districts are really limited with what they can do under that condition, where they're not able to bring back students in wholesale, just bringing school in.
Thank you. I think we're caught up.
Yeah, I think now our last slide is really questions, which we've been navigating. So we can take this, Mike's information is here for you. And definitely Mike is both a funny guy. So if you get a chance to interact with him and, ask him for a joke, he usually has a few. And so, both it's humorous and also lots of information. So that's helpful. And then I think we'll open up for other questions.
Candace, can parents qualify and be paid to be a para for their child if their child's health requires that no one outside of the family enters the home?
It really depends on a district. Every district is going to have different decisions around that. And they are going to have to navigate that along with their collective bargaining agreements with their unions because they are going to be providing a service outside of an employee group. So it's really district dependent. So it could be allowable under the conditions if the parents meet the requirements. Often in our schools, if you are serving a title school, or the school district policy is that all paraeducators, all assistants meet conditions of the 2 years of college or a number of other thresholds that they support. And so it really will be determined on a district independently deciding that.
Okay. Access for my daughter relies on the support of a para. PPS stopped providing one in the spring with no communication, and there hasn't been any communication with us or her para for this year. What should we do if one is not provided?
I think definitely, as always, when you're in a space of conflict, is first ask for a meeting and request to have an IEP meeting to understand the services, to understand how the services should be delivered in this new setting. What is the intention and plan for those services? If it was previously, if a required support person was there, it may be that it's not required in the new setting, but I think you have to be able to share information of what it looks like in the home setting, what the plan is going forward. So my best advice is the first step is to ask for an IEP meeting.
Good. How are you seeing districts help with internet access issues? What are we seeing around the state?
So a number of different projects and support going on. I know that some districts have offered hotspots and mobile hotspots and are using their federal CARES dollars to provide that for families at no cost and no charge. We also have seen some districts where they have not been able to do that, and they've used the federal CARES money in other ways. So it really is district dependent again. But there is a significant push both at the state level from the governor's office as well as our federal procurement and our work with the federal money on CARES to be able to support access.
Okay. On slide 29, you talked about promotion. Sarah is just wondering if that slide is suggesting that students will not be held back based on what happened in the spring.
Correct. It is a requirement that they cannot be held back in grade levels because of the spring COVID environment. That
And
likely
then
we saw lots of regression in all kinds of learners, typical and learners who have exceptional needs, and so every student has that right.
okay. A lot of questions around paraeducators and how families might be able to access the support that their students are used to. Will they have to have a teacher on every virtual call? Will students be able to work one-on-one with a para
Yeah,
in
one of
CDL?
under CDL, one of the big changes was both for title services as well as under SDI that paraeducators can be direct supports and provide small groups, provide direct instruction, do a lot of the work that wasn't happening in distance learning for all when it was only special ed teachers. And so this opens it up at a broader scale. What the requirement continues to be, especially design instruction, needs to be monitored and implemented at the direction of a special ed teacher. But just like in our schools, when our students are with us, and sometimes we have paraeducators who are doing the work with a student that was designed and planned by the licensed teacher. The same thing can happen in CDL.
Okay, question from Jennifer Spencer. How does the answer about sending staff into the home align with page 16? While in CDL, parents and caregivers are partners for instruction. Some parents/caregivers may need consultation, training, and coaching.
Yeah, so sending staff into home continues to be a district decision. Districts are likely going to have to navigate that question, whether that becomes an issue that they can support, and also through their collective bargaining, if it will be allowed. So nowhere in the guidance does it say that there will be anybody going into homes. That likely if you're in a comprehensive distance learning and you're part of a district that is not yet in a safe metric, that in-home services would be a safety concern, just like bringing students on site. So really it's going to be up to each district to navigate that. We do believe that this information, that some parents and caregivers, that they are going to be the partners in instruction. And that if you as a parent are sitting in partnership, that means you're likely going to need some training and support as you are willing and able. And so what we're asking districts is to consider, if you have families who are starting to do a lot of this work virtually, they've elected to keep their child at home and not access services any other way except through CDL, that we offer as teachers and educators, that we provide coaching, training, and support for families on how to do this. Just in that same way we do professional learning for teachers during this new time, the requirement is that families and educators partner together in this to become really that unit of instruction.
Thank you. A little clarification around hybrid. If a school returns to hybrid, family decides that student isn't safe to do that, would that student have the option to continue within CDL, or could the district force them into the fully virtual program?
Yeah, the requirements of RSSL again continue to say that a family or a student who has who is at risk, has underlying health conditions, or the family has elected services must be provided through CDL. And so most likely you're going to be in a spot where you can say we continue, even if we said hybrid up front, and then you start to come back and we say no thank you. You have a lot of opportunity in there. If your student's IEP needs to be adjusted in that, you may need to work with your case manager to update that service and provision. I think the conversation, when I'm looking here, Sarah had a question about personal service workers, and I just had a conversation with Dee Dee around this, and we were talking about a joint training, and really there is some time where we can think about the provision of personal service workers being paid through schools. There's some navigating in that because DHS workers under Medicaid policy cannot do education, but if a school district elected to provide service through that personal service worker, there's a path forward possibly. We're starting to navigate a little bit of that. Know that there are very big, the decisions around DHS and Medicaid and how that works will really drive that policy decision. And then it'll be up to each district to determine if that's the appropriate avenue for services, either SDI or related services.
Okay, Candace, it's 4 o'clock. So, Jamie, were you going to wrap up?
Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you, Candace, so much for sharing so many details and such great information with us. Thank you, ODE staff, for monitoring questions, and we appreciate you being here. We are so glad to be partnering with you to get our community the answers they are looking for to feel more confident and knowledgeable about what back to school means for students this fall. If you would like to access the webinar and any resources, please visit our website, abicommunity.org. One resource we would like to bring attention to is our 10 Tips for Educators and Parents resource. This resource is based on feedback parents of children with disabilities have provided in surveys, through interviews, and on training evaluations. While developing this resource, we considered many things, including best practices in inclusive schools, the hard work parents and teachers are doing as they plan and prepare for uncharted teaching and learning during this pandemic, sensitivity to the capacity and demands of parents and teachers, impacts to the disability communities now with additional stressors and barriers, expectations that Americans with Disabilities Act and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act will be followed, and supports will be implemented so that all students have access to education. I'll go ahead and put the link to the resource in the chat box now so that you can find it. Let's see. Looks like my chat is not available right now. Oh, there we go. And also, if we are definitely interested in your feedback, and so we would appreciate your participation in our evaluations so that we can find out what you learned from this webinar and help you get any questions answered that you still might have. Please take a moment to fill out the online evaluation. I'll also put that in the chat box now as well, if you would like to click on that now. And just one more thing we would like to highlight is our support for families who need assistance with special education or IEPs. Please let us know if we can help you. We can one-on-one review documents with you, plan for a meeting, help you understand rights, provide information, resources, and more. And we have support in Spanish and English. We are so glad you were able to join us today. Please contact us if you need assistance. You can email us at,
I'm very sorry to interrupt. Your links got posted privately, but not to the whole group.
Oh, thank you. I will repost those. You can contact us at info@nwdsa.org, call us at 503-238-0522, or visit our website, abicommunity.org. We appreciate the time you spent with us today. Thank you so much for being here. Take care. We hope you stay healthy and safe. Thank you so much.